She healed a paralyzed infertile CEO, shared a night of passion, and returned with his miracle triplets. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's Stories. Before we begin today's journey, let me share a special prayer for our growing storytelling family. Dear loving Creator, bless this beautiful family gathered here today, like a garden of diverse flowers blooming together. Just as roses share their fragrance, lilies their grace, and sunflowers their cheerful faces, may each member of Mr. Peter's storytelling family share their unique gifts and love with one another. Like the sturdy stems that support delicate petals, may we support each other through every chapter of life. Let our stories bloom like spring flowers, bringing joy, wisdom, and connection to all who gather here. Amen. Let me share with you some beautiful flowers that remind me of our family. Chrysanthemums. They represent honesty and deep friendship, just like the bond we share. Daffodils, symbolizing new beginnings and joy, welcoming our new family members. Orchids, representing beauty and strength, like the stories we share. Forget-me-nots, standing for true and faithful love, like our connection. Dahlias, symbolizing kindness and grace which flows through our community. My beautiful family, I love you very much. Let's take attendance now. For our existing family members, please comment "I am present." And for our new family joining today, please write "I am new." Since I can't see your previous reactions, I'd love to hear if my last stories satisfied you. Let's begin with love. The Amalfi Coast sparkled like scattered diamonds under the late afternoon sun. Wilbur William stood at the balcony of Villa Simbrone, his fingers absently tracing the ancient stone as he watched clouds gather on the horizon. Below him, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, its waters shifting from azure to slate as the weather began to turn. He should have known better than to plan an outdoor excursion with storm clouds approaching, but Sandy had insisted. His new bride always got what she wanted. "Darling, are you ready?" Sandy's voice floated from their suite, melodic and eager. "The concierge said the lookout point has the most incredible sunset views." Wilbur turned to find Sandy emerging onto the balcony, a vision in white linen. Her honey-blonde hair cascaded in perfect waves, and her sundress caught the breeze just so, making her look like something out of a high-fashion magazine. Then again, she'd been a model before they met, and old habits died hard. "The weather's turning," he cautioned, gesturing toward the gathering storm clouds. "Maybe we should wait until tomorrow." Sandy's perfectly painted lips formed a practiced pout. "But tomorrow we're scheduled for the yacht tour, and the next day is the cooking class." She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing herself against him. "Please, my love, this is our honeymoon. Let's be adventurous." The word adventurous, coming from Sandy, always carried a double meaning. It was what had first drawn him to her 2 years ago, at a charity gala where she'd boldly approached his table, champagne in hand, and declared that his company's renewable energy initiative needed a fresh perspective. She'd proceeded to outline a marketing strategy so brilliant it had taken his breath away. That she'd looked stunning in emerald silk hadn't hurt either. Their whirlwind romance had surprised everyone, especially the board members who'd whispered about trophy wives and gold diggers. But Sandy had proved them wrong, bringing her marketing expertise to William Enterprises and helping launch their most successful campaign to date. The fact that she'd signed an ironclad prenuptial agreement had silenced most critics. "All right," Wilbur conceded, reaching for his camera bag. "But we stay on marked paths, and we come back at the first sign of rain." Sandy's squeal of delight echoed off the villa's ancient stones. She darted inside, returning moments later with her designer backpack and the latest iPhone, complete with a professional-grade selfie stick. "I've already mapped the perfect route. There's this absolutely gorgeous cliff point that juts out over the water. The photos will be incredible." The path to the lookout wound through groves of twisted olive trees and past crumbling stone walls draped with bougainvillea. Sandy chatted animatedly about their evening plans. Dinner reservations at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Positano, followed by drinks at an exclusive rooftop bar she'd heard about from her modeling days. Wilbur listened with half an ear, his attention divided between his wife's enthusiasm and the increasingly threatening sky. The air had grown thick with moisture, carrying that distinctive metallic scent that preceded a storm. They should turn back, but he knew suggesting it would only lead to an argument. Sandy didn't take well to having her plans disrupted. The lookout point, when they reached it, was admittedly spectacular. A natural stone platform extended from the cliff face, providing an unobstructed view of the coastline. Ancient pine trees clung to the rocks behind them, their branches twisted by centuries of sea winds into haunting sculptures. Sandy immediately began directing their impromptu photo shoot. "Stand there, darling. No, a little to the left. The light's perfect right now." She adjusted her selfie stick, angling for the optimal shot of them both, with the dramatic coastline as backdrop. The first rumble of thunder was barely audible over the wind that had picked up, tugging at their clothes and whipping Sandy's hair into a golden tempest. She laughed, delighted by the drama of it all. "This is perfect. The lighting is absolutely magnificent." "Sandy, we need to head back." Wilbur reached for her arm, but she danced away, moving closer to the edge. "Just one more perfect shot," she called out, extending her selfie stick further. "The contrast between the dark clouds and the water is incredible." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion, yet too fast to prevent. A bright flash of lightning illuminated the coast, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Sandy startled, her designer sandals slipping on the wet stone. Her arms pinwheeled as she began to lose balance, the selfie stick clattering to the rocks. Wilbur's body moved before his mind could process the danger. 3 long strides brought him to the edge. His hands found Sandy's shoulders, pushing her backward onto solid ground, even as his own momentum carried him forward. Their eyes met in that fraction of a second, hers wide with shock, his filled with an instinctive acceptance of what was about to happen. The last thing he saw was Sandy's immaculate white dress against the storm-dark sky. The last thing he felt was the rush of wind and the first heavy drops of rain against his face. The last thing he heard was Sandy's scream, echoing off the ancient cliffs of the Amalfi Coast. Then came the impact. Pain exploded through his body like fireworks, each point of contact with the rocks sending new bursts of agony through his nervous system. He rolled and tumbled, unable to control his descent, aware only of the kaleidoscope of sea and sky spinning above him. Something cracked, multiple somethings, and a different kind of darkness began to creep in at the edges of his vision. His body came to rest on a narrow ledge, the taste of blood metallic in his mouth. Above, he could hear Sandy's screams growing more distant, though whether she was running for help or the storm was simply drowning her out, he couldn't tell. The rain fell harder now, each drop feeling like tiny needles against his broken body. Wilbur tried to move to assess the damage, but his lower body wouldn't respond to his commands. That should have terrified him, but a strange calm had settled over his mind. He'd saved Sandy. Whatever happened next, he'd saved her. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the turbulent Mediterranean below. The waves seemed to reach for him, dark fingers stretching up the cliffside. As consciousness began to slip away, Wilbur found himself thinking of all the meetings he'd have to reschedule. The board wouldn't be happy about this delay in the solar panel initiative. Such a strange thought to have while dying, he mused. Then again, perhaps he wasn't dying at all. Perhaps this was just another adventure, another challenge to overcome. Sandy loved adventures, after all. She'd help him through this. They'd laugh about it someday, over expensive wine in their penthouse apartment. The darkness at the edges of his vision grew deeper, more insistent. Wilbur could hear voices now, shouting in Italian, growing closer. The cavalry arriving, he thought distantly, always showing up in the final act, like in those old Western films his father had loved. His last conscious thought was of Sandy's smile that morning, radiant as she'd planned their day's adventure. She'd looked so beautiful, so full of life and enthusiasm. She'd understand that he couldn't let her fall. She'd stay by his side through whatever came next. They'd sworn their vows just 2 weeks ago, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. Thunder rumbled one final time as Wilbur slipped into unconsciousness, the rain continuing to fall on the Amalfi coast, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded on its ancient cliffs. In the distance, sirens began to wail, their urgent cry cutting through the storm like a prayer. But prayers, as Wilbur would soon learn, weren't always answered in the ways one hoped. And some falls, he would discover, weren't measured in meters, but in the depths of betrayal that waited in the sterile halls of a hospital room where true colors would be revealed under harsh fluorescent lights. For now, though, he floated in the darkness, unaware that this was only the beginning of his descent, not just from a cliff, but from everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and the true meaning of strength. Chapter 2. Shattered Dreams. The rhythmic beeping of medical monitors created a mechanical symphony in the private room of Ospedale Costa d'Amalfi. Wilbur drifted in and out of consciousness, each return to awareness, bringing new discoveries of pain and limitation. The Italian doctors spoke in hushed tones outside his door, their rapid-fire language punctuated by occasional English medical terms that sent chills down what remained of his functioning spine. Trauma, paralysis, permanent damage. Sandy's designer heels clicked against the hospital's marble floors, echoing through the corridors like tiny gunshots. She'd barely left the hospital in the 3 days since the accident, though Wilbur noticed she spent more time in the hallway on her phone than by his bedside. Her perfect makeup remained unmarred by tears, her clothes as immaculate as ever. Even tragedy, it seemed, couldn't disturb her carefully cultivated image. "Signor William?" Dr. Alessandro Rossi entered the room, his wire-rimmed glasses catching the harsh fluorescent light. He carried a tablet displaying what Wilbur assumed were his scan results, though from his angle the images were just abstract patterns of grey and white. "We have completed all necessary tests. I must speak with you and your wife about the results." Sandy's phone disappeared into her Hermes bag as she took her position beside Wilbur's bed, her manicured fingers resting lightly on the starched hospital sheets, not quite touching his hand. The distance between them seemed to grow with each passing hour, though neither acknowledged it. "The damage to your spine is significant." Dr. Rossi's accent thickened as he searched for the right words. "The impact caused severe trauma to the thoracic vertebrae. While the spinal cord is not completely severed, the swelling and compression have resulted in partial paralysis from the waist down." Wilbur stared at the ceiling, counting the tiny holes in the acoustic tiles. 1, 2, 3. Anything to avoid processing the doctor's words. Beside him, Sandy's breathing changed, becoming shallow and quick. "What are you saying?" Her voice carried that sharp edge Wilbur recognized from board meetings when things weren't going her way. "Will he walk again?" Dr. Rossi's silence lasted a heartbeat too long. "With extensive rehabilitation, there is perhaps a small chance of regaining some mobility. But I must be honest, the likelihood of a full recovery is very low. We recommend transfer to a specialized facility in the United States once you are stable enough for travel." The doctor continued speaking, outlining treatment plans and rehabilitation options, but his words faded into background noise as Wilbur watched Sandy's perfectly manicured hand withdraw from the bedsheet. She stood abruptly, mumbling something about needing air, and clicked her way out of the room. Through the window of his hospital room, Wilbur could see the same coastline that had nearly claimed his life, The Mediterranean sparkled innocently under the summer sun, as if it hadn't witnessed his world shattering just days before. A cruise ship glided by in the distance, its passengers undoubtedly enjoying their own honeymoon adventures, unaware of the drama unfolding in this sterile room. Hours passed in a blur of nurse visits, medication doses, and Sandy's increasingly frequent absences. When she did return that evening, her Chanel perfume couldn't quite mask the scent of cigarettes, a habit she'd supposedly quit years ago. She sat in the visitor's chair, her posture perfect even in distress, and pulled out her phone. "I've been in touch with the board," she said, not meeting his eyes. "They're concerned, naturally, but I've assured them you'll be able to manage most things remotely during recovery." Her fingers flew over the screen as she spoke. "I've also contacted Dr. Richardson back home. He's the best spinal specialist in the city. He's agreed to take your case." Wilbur watched her, noting how she spoke of his injury like another project to be managed, another problem to be solved with the right connections and enough money. "Sandy," he said softly, "look at me." She did, finally, but her green eyes held something he'd never seen before, not concern or love, but calculation. She was already plotting her next move, like the skilled strategist she'd always been. Only this time, he realized with growing dread, he might not be on the winning side of her strategy. The next week passed in a haze of medical procedures and preparations for transfer. Sandy handled all the arrangements with her usual efficiency, coordinating with their insurance, the medical team, and the air ambulance service. She was the perfect wife in front of the doctors and nurses, but Wilbur noticed how she flinched when they demonstrated the catheter procedures she'd need to learn, how she always found reasons to step out during physical therapy assessments. The night before their scheduled departure, Wilbur woke to find Sandy standing at the window, her silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. She didn't turn when he stirred, but her voice carried clearly through the quiet room. "Do you remember what you said to me the day you proposed?" She wasn't really asking, but Wilbur answered anyway. "I promised you an extraordinary life." "Yes." She turned then, and in the darkness, her expression was almost gentle. "You promised adventures and excitement. You promised to show me the world, to build an empire together." Her voice hardened. "You didn't promise this." "In sickness and in health," Wilbur reminded her softly. "Those were promises too." Sandy's laugh was brittle. "Pretty words for a pretty ceremony. But this isn't a temporary illness, is it? This is—" She gestured vaguely at his hospital bed, the medical equipment, his unmoving legs. "This is forever." "We don't know that. The doctors said with rehabilitation—" "Stop!" Sandy's voice cracked. "Just stop. I'm 32, Wilbur. I want children, a family. I want to travel, to dance at charity galas, to make love without worrying about medical complications. I want—" She paused, collecting herself. "I want the life you promised me." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words and shattered dreams. Outside, waves continued their eternal dance with the shore, indifferent to the human drama playing out above them. The medical transport back to the United States was a study in modern efficiency. Within hours of landing, Wilbur found himself in a private room at Mount Sinai, surrounded by new doctors with new opinions and new devastating pronouncements. Dr. Richardson was everything Sandy had promised: prestigious, confident, and brutally honest. He reviewed the Italian medical records with a furrowed brow before ordering a fresh round of tests. The results, when they came, struck the final blow to Wilbur's hopes for his marriage. "The trauma appears to have affected more than just your mobility," Dr. Richardson explained, his voice carrying that practiced sympathy of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. "The nerve damage and reduced blood flow have likely rendered you infertile." while there are some experimental treatments we could explore. Sandy didn't wait to hear the rest. She stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands, and walked out of the consultation room. This time, she didn't come back. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a junior associate from her lawyer's firm. Sandy hadn't even bothered to come herself. The documents were comprehensive, demanding half of everything: the company shares, the properties, the art collection they'd built together. Her signature was already there, elegant and final, like the period at the end of their story. Wilbur signed without reading the full document. What did material possessions matter now? He'd given up everything that truly mattered on that cliff, trading his life as he knew it for hers. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd saved her body at the cost of his own, only to have her destroy both their hearts in the aftermath. That night, alone in his hospital room, Wilbur allowed himself to cry for the first time since the accident. He cried for the future they'd planned, for the children they'd never have, for the love he thought would last forever. But mostly he cried for his own naivety in believing that love could conquer all obstacles, that vows spoken on a perfect summer day could withstand the storms of real tragedy. The nurses found him the next morning, dry-eyed and determined. If this was to be his new reality, he would face it head-on. Sandy might have taken his dreams of a family, his belief in lasting love, and half his material wealth. But she couldn't take his will to survive. He'd built an empire once. He could do it again, even if he had to do it from a wheelchair. What he didn't know then, as he steeled himself for the long road ahead, was that fate had other plans. Sometimes, he would later learn, the deepest falls lead to the highest rises, and the hearts that break most completely are the ones most ready to be healed by a different kind of love. One that sees beyond physical limitations to the strength of the spirit within. But that knowledge lay in his future, waiting in the form of a brilliant doctor with kind eyes, and a heart big enough to heal not just his body, but his soul. For now, Wilbur William, the man who had once stood at the top of both the business world and the Amalfi Cliffs, began the longest journey of his life, learning to live again in a world where everything, including his understanding of love itself, had been fundamentally altered. Chapter 3. The betrayal Mount Sinai Hospital's rehabilitation wing hummed with the quiet efficiency of expensive medical care. Autumn painted Central Park in shades of amber and crimson outside Wilbur's window, though he barely noticed the changing seasons anymore. Time had become a blur of physical therapy sessions, medical consultations, and increasingly tense conference calls with his board of directors. The morning started like any other, with his personal nurse helping him through the daily routine that had become his new normal. She chatted about the weather, her children's school activities, the small details of a life still in motion while his remained frustratingly static. The television mounted on the wall quietly played CNBC, stock tickers scrolling endlessly across the bottom of the screen. Breaking news from the energy sector, the anchor's voice cut through his morning haze. William Enterprises shares dropped 15% in early trading following announcements of CEO Wilbur Williams' extended medical leave. The nurse quickly reached for the remote, but Wilbur stopped her. "Leave it," he said softly, watching his life's work being dissected by financial analysts who spoke of his tragedy in terms of market impact and shareholder value. His phone buzzed. Marcus Chen, his CFO and longtime friend, calling for their daily update. "Will, we need to talk about the board meeting yesterday," Marcus began without preamble. "Sandy presented some concerning proposals." Wilbur's hand tightened around the phone. Sandy had wasted no time leveraging her position as head of marketing and soon-to-be ex-wife to position herself within the company. "What kind of proposals?" "She's suggesting a temporary leadership structure while you're—" Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Focusing on your recovery. She's aligned several key board members already. Of course she had. Sandy had always excelled at chess, both literal and corporate. While he'd been fighting for every inch of progress in physical therapy, she'd been moving pieces across the board, preparing for her endgame. "There's more," Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower. "She's been meeting with Richard Maxwell." The name hit Wilbur like a physical blow. Richard Maxwell, CEO of their largest competitor and Sandy's former flame from her modeling days. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Her frequent absences from the hospital, the mysterious calls she'd take in the hallway, the way she'd insisted on handling all communication with the board. "Get me everything you can on those meetings," Wilbur instructed, his business instincts kicking in despite the personal betrayal burning in his chest. "And Marcus, thank you for staying loyal. Always will. We've been friends since Stanford. I'm not about to let her destroy everything we've built." The call ended, but its implications echoed through Wilbur's mind as he prepared for his morning physical therapy session. The therapist noticed his distraction as they worked through the exercises, his movements more mechanical than usual. "Your body can sense when your mind is elsewhere," she chided gently. "Whatever's troubling you, leave it outside these walls. Here we focus on healing." Healing. The word had lost its meaning somewhere between the Italian doctor's initial prognosis and Dr. Richardson's more detailed devastation. Speaking of whom, the specialist was due for their weekly consultation this afternoon, another series of tests and carefully worded maybes that cost more than most people's annual salary. Dr. Richardson arrived precisely on schedule, his silk tie perfectly knotted despite the late hour. Something about the man had always set Wilbur's instincts on edge, though he couldn't quite place why. Perhaps it was the way his sympathetic smiles never quite reached his eyes, or how he seemed to have an answer for everything, yet actual progress remained elusive. "Mr. William," Dr. Richardson began, settling into the visitor's chair with his tablet. "I've reviewed your latest test results. The nerve conduction studies show minimal improvement, and the hormone panels." He paused, making a show of scrolling through data. "Well, they confirm our initial concerns about fertility." Wilbur watched the doctor's face carefully. "And the experimental treatments you mentioned?" "Unfortunately, given the extent of the trauma, I don't believe you would be a suitable candidate. The risks outweigh any potential benefits." Dr. Richardson's tone was practiced, professional, yet something in it rang false. "I would strongly advise against pursuing that avenue further." Before Wilbur could press for more details, a commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Sandy's voice carried through the door, sharp with anger. "What do you mean you won't release his complete medical records? I'm still legally his wife." Dr. Richardson excused himself smoothly, stepping into the hallway. The door didn't quite close behind him, allowing snippets of conversation to drift in. "Mrs. William, please lower your voice. Private consultation. Necessary precautions." Sandy's response was too quiet to hear, but her tone carried that dangerous sweetness Wilbur recognized from countless business negotiations. A few moments later, Dr. Richardson returned, his composure slightly ruffled. "My apologies for the interruption. Your wife is understandably concerned about your progress." He began gathering his things, movements just a touch too hurried. "I'll have the nurse bring your evening medications. Rest well, Mr. William." That night, sleep proved elusive. Wilbur's mind raced with possibilities and suspicions. He'd built his fortune on reading people, on sensing when deals weren't quite what they seemed. Something about this whole situation felt orchestrated, from Sandy's conveniently timed board power play to Dr. Richardson's insistence on specific treatments and medications. Around midnight, his phone lit up with a message from Marcus. "Found something. Thompson and Associates, law firms specializing in corporate takeovers. Sandy's been there 3 times this week. Maxwell's car spotted in their parking garage. Another piece of the puzzle, but still not the full picture. Wilbur spent the next hour making calls, leveraging old contacts and calling in favors. Each conversation added another layer to his understanding of Sandy's betrayal. She hadn't just been planning a divorce. She'd been orchestrating his complete removal from the company he'd built from the ground up. The infertility diagnosis had been the final nail in the coffin, giving her legal grounds to challenge his fitness to lead, while simultaneously freeing her to pursue her own ambitions without the burden of a disabled husband. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan when Wilbur finally allowed himself to face the full scope of her betrayal. Sandy hadn't just broken their marriage vows, she'd weaponized his tragedy, turning his darkest moment into an opportunity for corporate warfare. The nurse found him already awake during morning rounds, his expression set with a determination she hadn't seen before. "I need to make some changes to my care team," he informed her, "starting with Dr. Richardson. Can you help me arrange consultations with other specialists?" She hesitated. "Dr. Richardson has specifically requested that all your care be coordinated through him." "I'm sure he has," Wilbur replied grimly. "But as of this moment, I'm exercising my right to a second opinion, multiple second opinions." The morning brought a flurry of activity. Marcus arrived early, armed with files and a team of lawyers. Sandy's carefully constructed plan began to unravel as Wilbur reasserted control over what remained within his power. He might not be able to walk, but his mind was as sharp as ever, and he'd be damned if he'd let her steal everything he'd worked for. Legal documents flew back and forth between offices. Sandy's access to company resources was suspended pending investigation. Board members, sensing the shifting winds, began distancing themselves from her proposed leadership changes. By afternoon, the stock price had stabilized as the market responded to signs of Wilbur's renewed engagement with the company. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior nurse, reviewing his charts during the shift change, noticed discrepancies in his medication records. Certain treatments had been administered despite not being properly documented in his primary file. The dates coincided perfectly with Dr. Richardson's involvement in his case. "Mr. William," she said hesitantly, "I don't want to overstep, but these combinations of medications, they're known to cause false readings on certain diagnostic tests, particularly those related to nerve function and fertility." The implications hit him like a physical blow. Sandy hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She'd actively conspired to manipulate his medical treatment, likely working with Dr. Richardson to ensure diagnoses that would support her legal and corporate maneuvers. As sunset painted the hospital room in shades of gold and shadow, Wilbur made two decisions that would alter the course of his future. First, he instructed his lawyers to begin building a case against both Sandy and Dr. Richardson for medical fraud and corporate conspiracy. Second, he requested an immediate transfer to St. Mary's Rehabilitation Center, a facility known for its innovative approaches to spinal cord injuries. What he couldn't know, was that this decision would lead him to Dr. Tiffany Tara, the brilliant neurologist whose dedication to truth would unlock not just the mysteries of his condition, but the chambers of his heart he'd thought permanently sealed by betrayal. But that revelation lay ahead, waiting in the sterile corridors of St. Mary's like destiny, masquerading as coincidence. For now, Wilbur William, the man who had lost everything only to discover his inner strength remained unbroken, began the painstaking process of reclaiming his life from those who had tried to steal it through lies and manipulation. The autumn leaves continued their dance outside his window, nature's reminder that change, while often painful, could also be beautiful. And sometimes, he would later learn, the darkest betrayals lead us directly to our brightest beginnings. Chapter 4. Rock-bottom winter descended on New York with brutal efficiency, transforming St. Mary's Rehabilitation Center's carefully manicured grounds into a monochromatic landscape of whites and greys. From his fourth-floor room, Wilbur watched snowflakes spiral past his window, each one unique in its descent, yet all following the same inevitable path downward. Rather like his life these past months, he mused darkly. The room, despite its private status and expensive furnishings, had taken on the hollow feeling of extended hospitalization. Get-well cards gathered dust on the windowsill, their cheerful messages fading like the optimism they'd once carried. A tablet loaded with business reports lay untouched on the bedside table, Marcus's attempt to keep him engaged with the company he'd built. Depression, the doctors called it. A natural response to trauma, they assured him, as if giving his darkness a clinical name somehow made it more manageable. But how could they understand? They went home each night to live still full of possibility, to bodies that responded to their commands, to futures unmarred by betrayal. The physical therapy sessions continued with military precision, though Wilbur's progress had plateaued weeks ago. His therapist, a former Army rehabilitation specialist named Jack, refused to accept defeat. "The body follows where the mind leads," Jack would say, helping Wilbur through another set of exercises. "Right now your mind's leading you nowhere." The words stung because they carried truth. Since uncovering Sandy and Dr. Richardson's conspiracy, Wilbur had thrown himself into legal battles and medical investigations, using anger as a substitute for healing. But anger, like any fuel, eventually burns itself out, leaving only ashes of what might have been. Nights were the worst. Sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by dreams of falling, not from the Amalfi Cliffs this time, but through endless layers of betrayal. He'd wake gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, reaching for a glass of water he couldn't quite grasp without calling for assistance. These small indignities accumulated like the snow outside, burying his spirit beneath layers of helplessness. The lawyers provided regular updates on the case against Sandy and Dr. Richardson. Evidence mounted of their collusion, of falsified test results and manipulated treatments. But each revelation only served to deepen Wilbur's sense of violation. How long had Sandy been planning this? Had any part of their relationship been real, or had he simply been a carefully selected target from the beginning? Marcus visited when he could, bringing updates from William Enterprises wrapped in attempts at normalcy. "The renewable energy division exceeded projections this quarter," he reported one particularly grey afternoon. "The board's starting to remember who built this company in the first place." But Wilbur barely heard him, his attention caught by a young couple walking through the snow-covered garden below. The woman helped her partner navigate the slippery path, their laughter carrying faintly through the double-paned windows. Once, he and Sandy had walked like that, planning their future between stolen kisses and shared dreams. "Will," Marcus's voice cut through his reverie. "Are you listening? The SEC's investigating Richard Maxwell's recent stock purchases. We might have enough to prove insider trading." "Does it matter?" Wilbur turned from the window, his voice hollow. "Will proving their conspiracy heal my spine? Will it give me back the years I wasted loving a lie?" Marcus set down his tablet, really looking at his friend for the first time since arriving. The changes were subtle but profound. The slump in shoulders that once commanded boardrooms, the dimming of eyes that used to spark with innovation and drive. "You're giving up," he said quietly. "The Wilbur William I know never gives up." "The Wilbur William you knew died on that cliff," Wilbur replied, bitterness seeping through his carefully maintained facade. "This is what's left, half a man trying to hold on to half a life." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken concern. Finally, Marcus stood, straightening his tie with deliberate precision. "I'll have HR freeze the retirement package paperwork," he said firmly. "Take all the time you need to heal, but don't you dare think about quitting. The company needs you. More importantly, your employees need you. After Marcus left, Wilbur sat in gathering darkness, his friend's words echoing in his mind. On his tablet, email notifications blinked steadily. Department heads seeking guidance, project managers requesting approvals, the thousand small decisions that kept a corporate empire running. He'd built that empire from nothing, turning a small solar panel startup into a renewable energy powerhouse through sheer determination and vision. The night nurse found him still staring at the darkened tablet hours later. "Bad day?" she asked kindly, checking his vitals with practiced efficiency. "Bad life," he replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She paused in her duties, considering him with the frank assessment unique to medical professionals. "You know what we see here at St. Mary's? We see people at their lowest points. But we also see miracles, not the Hollywood kind with sudden cures and dramatic recoveries, but the quiet kind, the kind that happen when someone decides that their story isn't over yet." Her words followed him into uneasy dreams, mixing with memories of boardroom triumphs and Italian cliffs. He dreamed of falling again, but this time Sandy wasn't at the top of the cliff. Instead, she stood at the bottom, orchestrating his descent with the same precision she'd used to organize charity galas and marketing campaigns. Dawn brought a different kind of clarity. The snow had stopped, leaving behind a pristine landscape that seemed to mock his internal turmoil. His tablet chirped with a new message, not from Marcus or the lawyers this time, but from Sarah in engineering, a brilliant young developer he'd hired straight out of MIT. "Mr. William," her message began, "I know you're focusing on recovery, but I wanted to share something. That sustainable housing project you championed last year? We just completed the first prototype in Detroit. A family of 4 moved in yesterday, former homeless shelter residents. Their kids have their own rooms for the first time. This wouldn't have happened without your vision. We miss that vision here. Please come back to us when you can." Attached was a photo of a modest but modern home, solar panels gleaming on its roof, a young family standing proudly in front. They were smiling, not the practiced smile Sandy had perfected for cameras, but genuine expressions of joy and hope. Something shifted in Wilbur's chest, a crack in the permafrost that had settled around his heart. He thought of all the other projects in development, the innovations that could change lives, the dreams that didn't have to die just because one of his had. When Jack arrived for their morning session, he found Wilbur already dressed and waiting. "Well," the therapist said, noting the change in his patient's demeanor, "look who decided to join the land of the living." "The land of the trying," Wilbur corrected, gripping his wheelchair's arms with newfound determination. "We've got work to do." The next week saw subtle but significant changes. Wilbur began joining other patients in the communal physiotherapy room, rather than insisting on private sessions. He learned their stories, the college athlete adapting to life after a diving accident, the grandmother determined to dance at her grandson's wedding, the veteran relearning basic skills after a battlefield injury. Their struggles and small victories became part of his daily rhythm. He found himself offering encouragement, sharing resources, even laughing occasionally at the dark humor that often develops among long-term patients. The tablet on his bedside table saw more use, though now it was balanced between company business and research into emerging treatments for spinal cord injuries. Yet beneath this gradual renaissance, a deeper emptiness remained. The lawyers finally presented their complete case against Sandy and Dr. Richardson, the evidence of their conspiracy laid out in damning detail. The settlement discussions would begin soon, but the prospect of justice brought less satisfaction than he'd expected. One particularly restless night, unable to sleep, Wilbur asked the night nurse to help him to the hospital's small chapel. He wasn't particularly religious, but something about the quiet space called to him. Moonlight filtered through stained glass, casting colored shadows across empty pews. "I don't know if anyone's listening," he whispered to the silence. "But I need something. Not healing. I'm learning to accept. That might not come. Not revenge. That's hollow. Just purpose. Direction A. Reason to keep pushing forward." The chapel offered no immediate answer, but as he sat there in the quiet, Wilbur felt something shift inside him. The anger that had fueled him since discovering Sandy's betrayal began to settle into something else. Not acceptance exactly, but resignation to what was, combined with determination to discover what could be. He didn't know then that answers often come disguised as accidents, that destiny sometimes wears a white coat and carries medical journals, that love can heal wounds even medicine can't touch. He couldn't know that in less than 24 hours, a rushed doctor with kind eyes would quite literally crash into his life, setting in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about healing, hope, and the human heart. But for now, in the chapel's gentle silence, Wilbur William began the most difficult journey of all, forgiving himself for trusting the wrong person, for letting betrayal poison his spirit, for forgetting that even in the darkest winter, spring waits patiently to emerge. Dawn approached, painting the chapel's stained glass in new colors, promising another day of challenges and possibilities. Tomorrow would bring its own struggles, its own small victories and setbacks, but for the first time since his fall, Wilbur felt ready to face them, not as the man he had been, but as the man he was becoming. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that rock bottom often serves as the foundation for building something new, something stronger. And sometimes the universe's greatest gifts come disguised as its cruelest blows, waiting for us to be broken enough to be rebuilt, waiting for us to be empty enough to be filled with something better than what we lost. Chapter 5. Divine Intervention. Spring arrived at St. Mary's Rehabilitation Centre with gentle insistence, coaxing crocuses through lingering patches of snow and painting the grounds with tentative splashes of colour. Sunday mornings were typically quiet in the medical wing, with reduced staff and fewer therapy sessions scheduled. This particular Sunday seemed determined to break that pattern. Dr. Tiffany Tara hadn't planned to be at the hospital. Her day off had been carefully scheduled around catching up on medical journals and finally doing her laundry. But a 3 a.m. call about a promising new treatment protocol had her rushing to review the data firsthand. She'd built her reputation on innovative approaches to spinal cord injuries, and she wasn't about to let bureaucratic schedules interfere with potential breakthroughs. The morning sun streamed through the hospital's windows as she hurried down the corridor, arms laden with medical journals and research papers. Her natural curls had escaped their careful arrangement, forming a halo around her face in the early light. She'd forgone her usual heels for comfortable flats, making her quick stride nearly silent on the polished floors. Lost in thought about neural regeneration rates and stem cell applications, she didn't notice the wheelchair until the collision was inevitable. Papers flew everywhere as she stumbled, catching herself against the wall. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, mortified by her lack of attention. "Are you all right?" Then she looked up into the most compelling blue eyes she'd ever seen. Wilbur William hadn't planned on being in that corridor either. His usual Sunday routine involved physiotherapy in his private room, followed by video conferences with his management team. But something, perhaps the spring air, perhaps simple restlessness, had prompted him to wheel himself around the hospital's quieter wings. "I'm fine," he assured her, taking in the scattered papers and the concerned face above them. "Though I think your research has seen better days." Tiffany dropped to her knees, gathering papers with quick efficiency. "These journals have survived worse, believe me. My coffee addiction has put them through far more traumatic experiences." She paused, a familiar diagram catching her eye. You're interested in spinal cord regeneration studies? Wilbur glanced at the paper she held, one of his own research printouts that had mixed with her scattered documents. When it's your spine in question, you tend to develop a scholarly interest. Something in his tone made her look closer, professional assessment mixing with genuine curiosity. His wheelchair was top of the line. His posture, speaking of someone who'd commanded respect before injury, forced him to look up at the world. But it was his eyes that held her attention, brilliant blue and sharp with intelligence, yet carrying shadows of experiences she could only imagine. Dr. Tiffany Tara, she introduced herself, rising gracefully with her recollected papers. I specialize in innovative spinal cord injury treatments here at St. Mary's. Wilbur William, he replied, noting how she met his eyes directly, instead of the awkward downward glance many adopted when speaking to someone in a wheelchair. Though you probably know me better as the cautionary tale from the business section. CEO takes a cliff dive on his honeymoon. Her expression didn't change at the self-deprecating remark. Instead, she tilted her head thoughtfully. Actually, I know you as the patient in room 412, whose physical therapy progress reports have been frustratingly inconsistent with his initial diagnosis. That caught his attention. You've reviewed my case? I review all spinal cord cases that come through St. Mary's, she explained, shifting her papers to one arm so she could pull up his digital chart on her tablet. And yours. Well, let's just say some things haven't added up. Wilbur felt a familiar tension creep into his shoulders. Dr. Richardson's work has already been called into question. There's an ongoing investigation. I'm not interested in investigations or legal proceedings, Tiffany interrupted, her dark eyes intense. I'm interested in helping people walk again, and your case. She stopped, seeming to catch herself. I'm sorry, this isn't really the time or place. You probably have somewhere to be. Actually, Wilbur found himself saying, I was just heading to the cafeteria. They claim Sunday's coffee is marginally better than the rest of the week's. Care to test that theory with me? The smile that lit up her face transformed her from merely attractive to stunning. Well, as a coffee addiction expert, I suppose it's my professional duty to investigate. The cafeteria was nearly empty, morning sunlight creating pools of warmth on the utilitarian tables. They found a quiet corner where Wilbur could position his wheelchair comfortably. Tiffany returned from the counter with 2 steaming cups and a skeptical expression. I'm not sure this qualifies as coffee, she declared, settling into her chair. I think it's more of a caffeinated protest against good taste. Wilbur surprised himself by chuckling, the first genuine laugh he could remember in months. Clearly, we need to work on the hospital's beverage standards. Add it to the list, Tiffany agreed, pulling out his digital file again. But first, tell me about your therapy progression. These notes from your first month show significant nerve response in your lower extremities, but then there's a sudden plateau. What changed? He studied her face, looking for any sign of the calculation he'd grown to recognize in medical professionals. Instead, he found only genuine interest and something else, a fierce intelligence that seemed to radiate from within. That was around the time Dr. Richardson adjusted my medication protocol, he explained, watching her expression carefully. He said it was necessary to prevent complications. Tiffany's fingers flew across her tablet, pulling up comparative data. These combinations, they're not standard protocol for your type of injury. In fact, she stopped, her brow furrowing. Would you mind if I examined you? Not here, obviously, but in a proper consultation room. Wilbur hesitated. After the betrayal of trust with his previous medical team, the idea of submitting to new examinations made him uneasy. But something about Dr. Tara's direct gaze and no-nonsense manner cut through his defenses. There's an empty examination room down the hall, she offered, sensing his hesitation. Completely professional, full documentation, and you can stop the assessment at any time. The next hour changed everything. Tiffany's examination was indeed professional, but also revelatory. Her hands were gentle but confident as she tested nerve responses and muscle function. She explained each test as she performed it, her excitement growing as patterns emerged. Your spinal cord compression isn't nearly as severe as indicated in your previous records, she declared, reviewing her findings. And these nerve conduction tests, Wilbur, you've been systematically undertreated. The plateau in your progress wasn't natural. It was induced. The implications hit him hard. You're saying I could have been recovering all this time. I'm saying you still can. Tiffany's eyes blazed with conviction. With the right treatment protocol, intensive physical therapy, and some experimental techniques I've been developing, it won't be easy, but I believe you have significant potential for recovery. Wilbur felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope, fragile but persistent. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Tiffany set down her tablet, meeting his gaze directly. Because every patient deserves the truth about their condition, because I've dedicated my life to helping people regain what they've lost, and because... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes the universe puts the right person in the right place at exactly the right time. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting her face in gentle light. Wilbur noticed details he'd missed before, the determination in her jaw, the compassion in her eyes, the way her presence seemed to fill the room with positive energy. I won't make promises I can't keep, she continued. Recovery is never guaranteed, and the path won't be easy. But if you're willing to trust me, to work harder than you've ever worked before, I believe we can make significant progress. Trust. The word hung between them, heavy with implications. Wilbur thought of Sandy's betrayal, of Dr. Richardson's manipulation, of all the reasons he had to reject this offer of hope. But looking at Dr. Tiffany Tara, he saw something different, something genuine and fierce, and absolutely committed to healing. When do we start? He heard himself ask. Her smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. We already have. That coffee was your first test. Anyone willing to drink hospital cafeteria coffee clearly has the determination we'll need. They spent the next hour outlining a treatment plan, Tiffany's enthusiasm infectious as she explained new techniques and possibilities. Wilbur found himself engaged in a way he hadn't been since before the accident, his business mind appreciating her methodical approach, while something deeper responded to her passionate commitment to healing. As they wrapped up their impromptu consultation, Tiffany gathered her papers once again. Same time tomorrow, she suggested, though perhaps we could upgrade to coffee that doesn't qualify as cruel and unusual punishment. I know a place, Wilbur offered. They deliver proper coffee, even to hospitals. Now that's the kind of innovative thinking we need, she laughed, then grew serious. Thank you for trusting me with your case, Mr. William. Wilbur, he corrected. I think after sharing that cafeteria coffee experience, we can drop the formalities. Her smile held something warm and promising. Wilbur, it is. I'll see you tomorrow. He watched her walk away, her white coat catching the sunlight, her natural confidence evident in every step. For the first time since his fall, Wilbur felt truly awake, truly present in his own life. Whether it was the promise of new treatment possibilities or something more personal, he couldn't say. What he did know was that this chance encounter, this divine intervention, as he would later think of it, had shifted something fundamental in his world. Hope, that most fragile and precious of emotions, had taken root again in the garden of his heart. As he wheeled himself back to his room, Wilbur found himself looking forward to tomorrow in a way he hadn't for months. Whether it was the promise of better coffee, new medical possibilities, or simply the chance to see those compassionate eyes light up with professional enthusiasm again, he couldn't quite say. What he did know was that sometimes the universe has a way of bringing the right person into your life at exactly the moment you're ready to begin healing, not just in body but in soul. And sometimes that healing comes in forms you never expected, wearing a white coat and carrying an armful of medical journals, ready to crash into your life and change everything. Chapter 6. Secrets and Suspicions. The night shift at St. Mary's cast long shadows through the research wing as Tiffany pored over Wilbur's medical records for the third time that evening. Her office, usually meticulously organized, had transformed into a war room of medical data. Digital scans covered her monitors, while paper records and journal articles blanketed every available surface. Something wasn't adding up, and Dr. Tiffany Tara had never been one to leave medical mysteries unsolved. "You're here late again," Dr. James Chen observed from her doorway, 2 cups of actual coffee from the shop down the street in hand. As head of neurology, he'd been her mentor since her residency. "This wouldn't have anything to do with our high-profile patient in 412, would it?" Tiffany accepted the coffee gratefully, pushing aside a stack of nerve conduction studies to make room. "Look at these baseline readings from Mount Sinai," she said, pulling up a series of scans. "Then compare them to the treatment protocols Dr. Richardson prescribed. The dosages are all wrong, not just slightly off, but deliberately calibrated to suppress neural recovery." Dr. Chen studied the data, his expression growing grave. "You're suggesting intentional medical sabotage?" "I'm suggesting someone wanted to ensure Wilbur Williams stayed in that wheelchair." Tiffany pulled up another set of records. "And it gets worse. These fertility test results, they're inconsistent with both the type and location of his spinal cord injury. Someone manipulated these readings." "That's a serious accusation, Doctor," Chen warned. "Richardson has powerful connections in the medical community, and from what I hear, the patient's ex-wife has significant influence as well." Tiffany's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "I'm not afraid of powerful people, James. I'm afraid of what happens to patients when doctors betray their oath for profit." The older doctor studied his protégé carefully. In the 7 years he'd known her, he'd never seen her this invested in a case. "Just be careful," he advised. "Document everything. And remember, your primary duty is to your patient's recovery, not solving a conspiracy." After he left, Tiffany returned to her investigation with renewed focus. She'd built her career on challenging medical orthodoxy, developing innovative treatments that gave hope to patients others had written off. But this was different. This wasn't just about medicine, it was about justice. Morning rounds found her still piecing together evidence, though she'd changed into a fresh set of scrubs kept in her office for such occasions. She saved her first visit for room 412, where she found Wilbur already awake and reviewing business reports on his tablet. "You're here early," he observed, setting aside his work. Something in his expression brightened at her arrival, though he tried to hide it. "Actually, I'm here late," she admitted, stifling a yawn. "Your case file's made for some interesting midnight reading." Concern flickered across his features. "You didn't have to stay up all night reviewing my records." "Yes, I did." Tiffany pulled up the chair beside his bed, her professional demeanor softening slightly. "Wilbur, what I found... There's no easy way to say this. The treatment protocols you received weren't just ineffective. They were designed to prevent your recovery." She watched the information land, saw the mix of emotions cross his face: anger, pain, and something deeper that looked like vindication. "I suspected," he said quietly. "After everything with Sandy, I knew something wasn't right with the medical side of things, but hearing it confirmed..." "There's more," Tiffany continued, pulling out her tablet. Those fertility test results that were used in your divorce proceedings, they were falsified. The damage from your injury shouldn't have affected reproductive function to that degree. Wilbur's hands gripped his wheelchair arms, knuckles turning white. So not only did they try to keep me from walking, they also... He couldn't finish the sentence. They created a medical narrative that supported your ex-wife's legal strategy, Tiffany confirmed gently. But Wilbur, this also means something else. Your potential for recovery is significantly higher than previously indicated. The damage, while serious, isn't as extensive as Dr. Richardson claimed. Hope warred with bitterness in his expression. How much recovery are we talking about? With aggressive therapy and some experimental treatments I've been developing? Tiffany leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. I believe you could regain significant mobility. Walking isn't just a pipe dream, it's a real possibility. But I need you to trust me completely. No holding back, no protecting yourself emotionally. This will be hard, often painful work. Trust. There was that word again, loaded with all the weight of his recent betrayals. But looking into Dr. Tara's earnest face, Wilbur found himself wanting to believe, not just in the possibility of walking again, but in the existence of medical professionals who genuinely cared about healing. What's our first step? He asked. Tiffany's answering smile was both professional and warmly personal. First, we need to flush the remnants of Richardson's medication protocol from your system. Then we start with targeted electrical stimulation combined with aggressive physical therapy. I've developed a new approach that's showing promising results in similar cases. She spent the next hour outlining her treatment plan, her enthusiasm infectious as she explained the science behind each step. Wilbur found himself equally captivated by the medical information and by the way her eyes lit up when discussing potential breakthroughs. There is one catch, she added, somewhat hesitantly. The hospital board is conservative about approving experimental treatments. I'll need to present your case, prove that traditional methods have failed and justify my approach. It could take time to get formal approval. Time I don't have if we want to build a case against Richardson and Sandy, Wilbur concluded. A familiar gleam entered his eye, the same look that had helped him build his business empire. What if I signed up as a voluntary participant in a research study, one that happened to use your experimental protocols? Tiffany caught his meaning immediately. That could work. I do have several ongoing studies. Adding a new participant wouldn't raise any red flags. But Wilbur, are you sure? This isn't just about getting evidence against them anymore. This is your health, your recovery we're talking about. I'm sure, he said firmly. For the first time since the accident, I feel like I'm taking control of my own healing. Besides, he added with a hint of his old charm, I trust my doctor. The words hung between them, carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. Tiffany felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction and everything to do with the way Wilbur was looking at her. She cleared her throat, returning to safer medical territory. We'll need to document everything meticulously, photos, videos, daily progress reports, not just for the potential legal case, but for medical verification of the treatment's effectiveness. Always the scientist, Wilbur teased gently. Always, she agreed, but her smile held something softer than pure professional interest. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Tiffany arranged for new baseline tests, coordinated with the physical therapy team, and began the paperwork to add Wilbur to her research study. She tried to ignore the way her heart jumped whenever he looked at her with those intense blue eyes, or how his rare smiles made her want to work even harder to help him heal. Evening found her back in her office, updating Wilbur's digital charts with their new treatment plan. A knock at her door revealed Dr. Chen again, this time with a concerned expression. "The board's asking questions about your interest in the William case," he warned. "And I heard Richardson made some calls to his contacts here." Tiffany straightened, her jaw set with determination. "Let them ask. Every step I'm taking is completely documented and ethically sound. They can review my work anytime they want." "It's not just about the medicine anymore, is it?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "I see the way you look at him, Tiffany, the way he looks at you. This is about justice," she insisted, but even to her own ears, the words sounded incomplete. "And healing, nothing more." Her mentor's knowing look suggested he wasn't convinced, but he didn't press the issue. "Just remember, emotions complicate everything, especially medicine." After he left, Tiffany sat in her darkening office, trying to sort through her conflicting feelings. Yes, she was passionate about helping all her patients recover. Yes, she was dedicated to exposing medical malpractice wherever she found it. But with Wilbur, there was something more, something that made her heart race whenever she entered room 412. She thought about his subtle humor, the intelligence behind his questions, the way he'd maintained his dignity despite everything he'd endured. She thought about his trust in her, freely given despite his recent betrayals. She thought about the way he saw her, not just as a doctor, but as a person, a woman, someone worth sharing real conversation with. "Focus on the medicine," she told herself firmly. But even as she turned back to her work, she knew it was already too late. Something had sparked between them, something that went beyond doctor and patient, beyond healer and wounded soul. As if summoned by her thoughts, her phone lit up with a message from Wilbur. "Thank you for believing in me, not just in my potential for physical recovery, but in my right to know the truth. I haven't felt this hopeful since before the accident." Tiffany stared at the message, her heart doing that uncomfortable jump again. She thought carefully before responding. "Hope is the first step toward healing. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start the real work." She set her phone aside, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her chest, when he replied with a simple, smiley face. Dr. Chen was right. Emotions complicated everything. But sometimes she was beginning to suspect those complications were exactly what the heart needed to heal. Outside her window, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Somewhere in the hospital, Wilbur was hopefully sleeping, his body preparing for the challenges ahead. And here in her office, surrounded by medical texts and research data, Dr. Tiffany Tara admitted to herself what she'd been trying to deny. She was falling for her patient. The realization should have terrified her. It should have sent her running to the ethics board to recuse herself from his case. Instead, it filled her with a fierce determination. She would help him walk again, expose the truth about his previous treatment, and maintain absolute professional boundaries while doing so. And if her heart beat a little faster when he smiled at her, well, that was a complication she'd deal with later. For now, there was work to be done, truth to be uncovered, and healing to be initiated, both physical and emotional, for patient and doctor alike. Chapter 7. Trust and Touch. The hydrotherapy pool at St. Mary's gleamed like liquid sapphire in the early morning light. Tiffany stood at the edge, reviewing the day's treatment plan while waiting for her patient. 6 weeks had passed since she'd taken over Wilbur's case, and each day brought new challenges and new revelations. "Ready to turn me into a merman?" Wilbur's voice carried from the entrance, where an orderly helped him transfer from his wheelchair to the pool chair lift. His tone was light, but Tiffany noticed the tension in his shoulders. Water therapy always made him slightly nervous, a holdover from his cliff fall. "Let's start with getting you walking in water before we discuss any mythological transformations," she replied, matching his attempt at humor. She'd learned that keeping things light helped ease his anxiety, though she never let it compromise the seriousness of their work. The pool chair lowered him gradually into the heated water. Tiffany slipped in after him, her professional swimsuit allowing full range of motion while maintaining appropriate clinical appearance. She'd grown acutely aware of maintaining boundaries, even as their daily interactions made those boundaries increasingly difficult to define. "How are the new nerve stimulation treatments feeling?" she asked, helping him into position for their first set of exercises. Her hands were professional but gentle as they supported his lower back. "Better," Wilbur answered, concentrating on the movements. "The tingling sensation lasts longer after each session. And yesterday, I swear I felt my toe move when I wasn't actively trying." Tiffany's heart leapt at this news, though she kept her voice steady. Involuntary movement is often a good sign. It means the neural pathways are re-establishing themselves. She adjusted her grip, helping him through a series of leg flexions. "Any pain?" "Some," he admitted, "but not the bad kind. More like awakening." She nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Pain in rehabilitation could be either friend or foe. The key was learning to distinguish between healing discomfort and actual damage. Wilbur had become remarkably attuned to his body's signals, a fact that both impressed and worried her. The more awareness he developed, the more he'd realized just how much his previous treatment had held him back. The water created a peaceful environment for their work, its buoyancy allowing movements that would be impossible on land. Tiffany guided him through their established routine, adding new challenges as his strength improved. She tried to ignore how intimately aware she was of his body under her hands, the way his muscles responded to her touch, the trust he placed in her guidance. "Tell me about your latest renewable energy project," she prompted as they moved into more challenging exercises. She'd discovered early on that engaging his mind helped distract from physical discomfort. Wilbur's face lit up as he described his company's newest innovation in solar technology. Even partially paralyzed, he remained a force in the business world, running board meetings via video conference and directing research from his hospital room. His passion for sustainable energy was genuine and infectious. "Sorry," he caught himself mid-explanation. "I'm probably boring you with technical details." "Not at all," she assured him, adjusting her stance to help him with a particularly challenging movement. "I find it fascinating. Besides, your brain activity during our sessions is just as important as your physical engagement." Their eyes met for a moment, and something electric passed between them that had nothing to do with medical stimulation. Tiffany quickly refocused on their exercises, though she couldn't quite ignore the way her pulse had quickened. "Speaking of engagement," Wilbur said after a moment, his tone carefully neutral, "how are the board reviews of your treatment protocols going?" Tiffany's hands stilled briefly before resuming their therapeutic motions. "There's some resistance to the more experimental aspects. Dr. Richardson apparently still has supporters who question my methods." She helped him complete another set before adding, "But the preliminary results speak for themselves. Your progress is unprecedented for someone with your initial diagnosis." "You mean my falsified diagnosis?" Wilbur corrected grimly. "Have you received any more pressure to drop my case?" She hesitated, not wanting to burden him with the political battle she'd been fighting. Dr. Richardson's allies on the hospital board had become increasingly vocal in their criticism of her methods, though they couldn't argue with the documented improvements in Wilbur's condition. "Nothing I can't handle," she assured him, but something in her voice must have given her away. "Tiffany." His hand caught hers under the water, halting their exercise. "You don't have to protect me. We're in this together." The simple touch of his hand sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the heated pool. She should pull away. Maintaining professional distance was crucial. Instead, she found herself squeezing his hand briefly before resuming their therapy. "The board has scheduled a review of all my research protocols," she admitted. "They're questioning the rapid progress you're making, suggesting it might indicate that your original injury was exaggerated, which would actually help prove the case against Richardson and Sandy," Wilbur pointed out. "Yes, but it also puts my treatment methods under intense scrutiny. If they find any procedural violations—" She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew what was at stake. Wilbur's jaw set in a determined line she'd come to recognize. "I won't let them discredit your work. My lawyers are building an ironclad case against Richardson. When it breaks, your methods will be vindicated." Their therapy session continued, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. Their usual comfortable rhythm felt charged with unspoken emotions and shared purpose. Tiffany found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them, each touch carrying meaning beyond its therapeutic intent. As she helped him with his final exercises, she noticed something remarkable. "Wilbur," she said softly, "look at your left foot." He glanced down through the crystal-clear water. His foot was moving, not much, just a slight flexing of the toes, but the movement was definitely voluntary. His sharp intake of breath echoed off the pool's surface. "Is that—" He couldn't finish the question. "Voluntary muscle control," she confirmed, joy and professional satisfaction warring in her voice. "It's happening, Wilbur. The nerve pathways are regenerating." Before she could stop herself, she hugged him, a brief, impulsive celebration that broke every rule of professional distance she'd set for herself. She pulled back quickly, flushing. "I'm sorry, that was unprofessional." "Don't be," he interrupted, his eyes intense. "Your passion for healing is what's making this possible. Never apologize for that." They finished the session in charged silence, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them. As the pool lift helped Wilbur from the water, Tiffany busied herself with updating his treatment notes, trying to maintain clinical detachment. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, as the orderly helped him back to his wheelchair. "Actually," she heard herself saying, "I thought we might try something different. The hospital garden has parallel bars we could use for land therapy. The morning air might be good for you. Are you suggesting we take our relationship outdoors, Doctor? Tara?" His tone was teasing, but something in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm suggesting we take advantage of every therapeutic option available, Mr. William," she replied primly, though she couldn't quite hide her smile. After he left, Tiffany remained by the pool, watching the water settle into stillness. She was walking a dangerous line between professional dedication and personal involvement, and she knew it. Every touch, every shared smile, every moment of connection pushed them further into territory that could compromise both his treatment and her career. But watching him progress, seeing hope replace bitterness in his eyes, feeling his trust in her grow with each session, it made all the professional risks seem worth taking. She wasn't naive enough to call it love. Not yet, not while he was still her patient. Not while they were both focused on his recovery, but it was something equally powerful, a partnership of healing, a shared journey toward redemption. As she gathered her things to prepare for her next patient, Tiffany's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen. "Board meeting tomorrow. Richardson supporters pushing for full review of William case. Be prepared." She straightened her shoulders, determination replacing uncertainty. Let them investigate. Every treatment was documented, every progress note detailed, every procedure within acceptable parameters. She would fight for her patient's right to heal, for her right to practice innovative medicine, and for the truth to finally emerge. And if her heart beat a little faster when she thought about tomorrow's garden therapy session, well, that was something she'd have to deal with eventually. But for now, she had a battle to prepare for, one that would require all her professional expertise and personal courage. Because somewhere between those first tentative therapy sessions and today's breakthrough, Tiffany had realized an essential truth. Healing wasn't just about mending bodies or exposing medical fraud. Sometimes it was about restoring faith in medicine, in justice, and most importantly, in love's power to transform even the deepest wounds into opportunities for growth. The pool lights dimmed automatically as she left, casting rippling shadows on the walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, the morning air in the garden would carry the promise of something more than just physical healing. Chapter 8. First Steps. The hospital garden bloomed with early summer roses, their fragrance mixing with morning dew as Tiffany checked the parallel bars for the 100th time. She'd arrived before sunrise to ensure everything was perfect for today's session. After yesterday's breakthrough in the pool, she had a feeling something extraordinary was possible. Her phone buzzed with yet another message from the board, another demand for documentation, another thinly veiled threat about protocol reviews. She silenced it without reading. Today wasn't about hospital politics or professional jealousies. Today was about possibility. Someone's here early. Wilbur's voice carried across the garden path. He was navigating his wheelchair independently now, his upper body strength significantly improved from their weeks of therapy. Couldn't sleep either, Tiffany turned, taking in his appearance. He'd traded his usual hospital attire for proper workout clothes, compression shorts and a fitted tank top that revealed the results of their upper body training. She forced her gaze to remain professional, though she couldn't quite ignore how the morning light emphasized the strength in his shoulders. "Sleep is overrated when you're on the verge of a breakthrough," she replied, gesturing to the parallel bars. "How are you feeling after yesterday's pool session?" "Any residual soreness?" "Some," he admitted, positioning his wheelchair at the start of the bars. "But like you said before, it's the good kind of pain, the kind that means something's changing." Tiffany knelt to check his legs, her touch clinical despite the intimacy of the position. The muscle tone had improved significantly since she'd taken over his case and the nerve responses. She pressed gently at specific points, noting his reactions. "The spasticity is definitely decreasing," she observed, "and the muscle recruitment patterns are more coordinated." She looked up, finding his blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Are you ready to try something ambitious?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "With you?" "Always." The double meaning hung in the air between them, adding another layer to the morning's charged atmosphere. Tiffany straightened, focusing on the medical task at hand. "We're going to attempt supported standing. The parallel bars will take most of your weight, but I want you to focus on engaging your core and leg muscles, just like we practiced in the pool." She helped him position his feet properly, trying to ignore how natural it felt to be in his personal space. Over the weeks of therapy, their bodies had developed a kind of wordless communication. She could sense his tension, adjust her support accordingly, anticipate his movements before he made them. "Remember," she instructed, moving to stand beside him, "I'm right here. You can't fall." Wilbur gripped the parallel bars, his knuckles whitening slightly. "You won't let me," he said softly, and they both knew he wasn't just talking about physical support. The first attempt to rise was a study in concentrated effort. Tiffany could see every muscle engaging, feel the tremors running through his body as he fought against gravity and damaged nerve pathways. She supported him carefully, her hands steady on his waist as he pushed upward. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, incrementally, Wilbur began to rise from the wheelchair. His arms shook with effort, but his legs, his supposedly paralyzed legs, were engaging, helping to lift his body. "That's it," Tiffany encouraged, her voice thick with emotion. "You're doing it, Wilbur. Keep going." The garden held its breath as Wilbur William, the man who'd been told he'd never stand again, rose to his full height. He towered over Tiffany now, though she maintained her supportive hold on his waist. They were close enough that she could feel his heartbeat racing, see the mix of triumph and disbelief in his eyes. "I'm standing," he whispered, awe coloring his voice. "Tiffany, I'm actually standing." "Yes, you are." She blinked back unexpected tears. "How does it feel?" Like being alive again." His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. "Like everything's possible." They stayed like that for several long moments, his hands gripping the parallel bars while she supported his balance. The morning sun painted them in gentle light, the roses adding their sweet perfume to a moment neither would ever forget. "Want to try something really ambitious?" Tiffany asked, her professional excitement barely contained. Wilbur's eyes met hers, trust and determination shining in their depths. "Lead the way, Doctor." "Tara." She adjusted her position, moving to stand slightly in front of him while maintaining support. "We're going to attempt one step, just one. Focus on shifting your weight like we practiced in the pool. Let the bars take most of it, but try to engage your right leg to move forward." The concentration on his face was absolute as he processed her instructions. Sweat beaded on his forehead, testament to the enormous effort required. Slowly, with trembling determination, his right foot began to lift from the ground. The movement was small, barely an inch of progress, but it was intentional, controlled, possible. "Magnificent," Tiffany breathed, her professional detachment slipping in the face of this miracle. "Now place it down, just a bit forward, that's it. Perfect." The foot touched down successfully, one small step that represented a giant leap in his recovery. Wilbur's laugh was part triumph, part disbelief, and part pure joy. "I did it," he said, his voice shaking. "I actually did it." "You did," Tiffany confirmed, her own voice unsteady. "And this is just the beginning." Their eyes met again, and something electric passed between them. They were still in position, her hands on his waist, his body mere inches from hers, both of them caught in a moment of shared victory that felt intensely intimate. "Tiffany," Wilbur began, his voice low and intense, but whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Chen. "Well," the older doctor said, taking in the scene before him, "I'd say this proves your treatment protocols are working, wouldn't you?" Tiffany stepped back quickly, though she maintained her professional support of Wilbur's balance. "Dr. Chen, we were just documenting Mr. Williams' progress with supported standing and initial step training." "So I see." Dr. Chen's expression was unreadable. "The board will be very interested in these developments, though perhaps we should discuss the emotional involvement aspects of the case as well." Wilbur's hands tightened on the parallel bars. "Dr. Tara's involvement has been nothing but professional and dedicated. If the board has concerns, they should direct them to me." "And they will," Dr. Chen assured him. "Believe me, they will. For now, perhaps we should get you back to your wheelchair. Even successful first steps shouldn't be prolonged." The moment was broken. Tiffany helped Wilbur back into his chair with practiced efficiency, though her hands trembled slightly. The triumph of his progress was now tinged with anxiety about the board's reaction. "Same time tomorrow?" Wilbur asked as doctor. Chen prepared to wheel him back inside. "Actually," Dr. Chen interrupted, "the board has requested Dr. Tara's presence at an emergency meeting. We'll need to adjust tomorrow's schedule." Tiffany felt her heart sink, but kept her voice steady. "I'll have Dr. Martinez cover your hydrotherapy session. Don't skip it. Maintaining the rhythm of treatment is crucial right now." Wilbur caught her hand briefly before Dr. Chen could wheel him away. "Thank you," he said softly, "for believing in possibilities." She watched them disappear into the hospital, her emotions a turbulent mix of professional triumph and personal turmoil. The morning's breakthrough should have been purely celebratory, but now it was complicated by the reality of hospital politics and ethical considerations. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the board, this one marked urgent. They'd moved the meeting up to this afternoon. She had just hours to prepare her defensive treatment protocols that, while controversial, were clearly working. As she gathered her documentation and treatment notes, Tiffany found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. Somewhere between innovative medical treatment and genuine healing, she'd crossed a line. Her feelings for Wilbur had grown beyond professional concern, beyond clinical interest, into something much more dangerous and wonderful. The roses continued their quiet blooming, indifferent to human drama. But they'd witnessed something remarkable this morning, not just a patient's first steps toward recovery, but perhaps also a doctor's first steps toward acknowledging that sometimes the heart's healing was just as important as the body's. Tiffany straightened her lab coat, squared her shoulders, and headed inside to face the board. She would fight for her patient's right to heal, for her innovative treatments, and for the truth about his previous care to come to light. And if her heart raced a little faster when she thought of the way he'd looked at her this morning, well, that was a diagnosis she'd have to deal with later. For now, she had truth to defend and healing to protect. The rest, including the undeniable chemistry between her and her patient, would have to wait. Though somehow, as she prepared for battle with the board, Tiffany suspected that some things couldn't be put on hold indefinitely. Some connections, like some healings, had their own timeline, their own rhythm, their own undeniable power. The garden would be waiting tomorrow, its roses still blooming, its parallel bars still offering support for new possibilities. And maybe, just maybe, the next steps taken there would be both physical and emotional, leading both doctor and patient toward a future neither had imagined possible just a few months ago. Chapter 9. Rising storm thunder rumbled in the distance as Tiffany stood before the hospital board, her evidence spread across the mahogany conference table. 3 months of meticulous documentation, breakthrough videos, and comparative analyses laid bare the truth about Wilbur Williams' case. As you can see, she concluded, gesturing to the latest nerve conduction studies, the patient's actual condition varies significantly from Dr. Richardson's original diagnosis. These discrepancies cannot be explained by natural recovery patterns. Dr. Richardson's allies on the board shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Whitman, head of the ethics committee, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting deliberate medical misconduct, Doctor?" "Tara." "I'm presenting evidence," Tiffany replied carefully. "The board can draw its own conclusions about intent. What's undeniable is that my treatment protocols, which the board questioned so intensively, have produced documented recovery that proves the original diagnosis was inaccurate at best, fraudulent at worst." Lightning flashed outside the windows, illuminating the tension in the room. Dr. Chen, sitting at the end of the table, gave her an almost imperceptible nod of approval. He'd warned her this meeting would be crucial, but neither of them had anticipated the bombshell that was about to drop. The boardroom door opened, admitting a tall woman in an expensive suit. "I believe I can shed some light on intent," she announced, striding to the table. "Lauren Matthews, FBI White-Collar Crime Division. We've been investigating Dr. Richardson for systematic insurance fraud across multiple hospitals." The room erupted in controlled chaos. Board members whispered urgently to each other, while Dr. Richardson's supporters suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Tiffany's heart raced, but she kept her expression professionally neutral. "Agent Matthews," Dr. Whitman managed, "this is a closed board meeting, and this is a federal investigation into medical fraud that has cost insurance companies millions and patients their chance at recovery." She placed a thick folder on the table. "Doctor, Tara's evidence in the William case helped us connect several dots. We'll need the hospital's full cooperation." Tiffany's phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Wilbur. "Everything okay? You're late for our session." She glanced at the stormy scene unfolding in the boardroom and typed back quickly. "Something big is happening. Meet me in the garden in 20 minutes. His reply was immediate. "I'll be there. Stay strong." The next 20 minutes were a blur of federal agents, nervous administrators, and hastily called legal consultations. When Tiffany finally escaped to the garden, the storm had passed, leaving behind air heavy with possibility. Wilbur was waiting by the roses, his wheelchair positioned near their parallel bars. He'd been practicing standing independently between sessions, she could tell. His improved posture and muscle definition spoke of extra effort. "You look like someone who just won a war," he observed as she approached. "More like someone who just started one," she replied, dropping onto the bench beside him. "The FBI showed up at the board meeting. They're investigating Richardson for systematic fraud. Apparently, we weren't his only victims." Wilbur absorbed this information, his expression darkening. Sandy had to know. The timing of everything was too perfect. He reached for Tiffany's hand, an increasingly common gesture between them. "Are you okay? This vindication should feel better than it does." His touch sent warmth through her despite the lingering humidity. "I'm worried about backlash. Richardson has powerful friends, and exposing medical fraud this extensive, there will be consequences." "You mean threats?" His grip tightened slightly. "Have you received any?" She hesitated, thinking of the anonymous notes left in her office, the whispered warnings from colleagues, the sudden problems with her research funding. "Nothing I can't handle. Tiffany." His voice carried that tone that meant he saw right through her professional facade. "Let me help. My security team is the best in the business. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He gestured at his legs. "You've given me back my future. Let me help protect yours." The intimacy of the moment was broken by approaching footsteps. Agent Matthews appeared on the garden path, her suit jacket now draped over her arm, in concession to the humidity. "Mr. William," she greeted him, "I was hoping to find you both. We need to discuss your ex-wife's involvement in this scheme." Wilbur's expression hardened. "Sandy's too smart to leave obvious evidence." "Perhaps," Matthews agreed, "but she made one crucial mistake. She got greedy." The agent pulled out her tablet, displaying financial records. The insurance payouts from Dr. Richardson's falsified diagnoses weren't just going to his offshore accounts. A significant percentage was being funneled through a series of shell companies, all leading back to one holding company. "Let me guess," Wilbur said grimly. "Maxwell Industries." "Richard Maxwell's company?" Tiffany looked between them. "Your ex-wife's new partner, in more ways than one," Wilbur finished. "They've been working together since before the divorce, haven't they?" Matthews nodded. "We believe your accident presented an opportunity they'd been waiting for. Dr. Richardson was already on their payroll, helping to fraudulently deny insurance claims to drive target companies into financial distress. Maxwell would then swoop in with low-ball buyout offers." "But they didn't count on you fighting back," Tiffany realized, looking at Wilbur. "Or on your actual recovery proving their medical claims false." Thunder rumbled again in the distance, a new storm approaching. Wilbur stared at the parallel bars where he'd taken his first steps, his expression a mix of anger and determination. "How do you want to handle this?" Matthews asked. "We can move on them now, but a slower approach might let us uncover more conspirators." "No," Wilbur decided firmly. "No more waiting. They've hurt too many people already." He looked at Tiffany. "How many other patients has Richardson condemned to wheelchairs they don't need?" Her heart clenched at the thought. "I can help identify potential victims. I've seen patterns in his referral records that never made sense until now." That would be invaluable, Matthews agreed. But Dr. Tara, you should know, going public with this will make you a target. Richardson's allies won't go down quietly. I'm already a target, Tiffany replied, squaring her shoulders. At least now we're fighting back. The next few hours were a whirlwind of federal agents, witness statements and medical record reviews. Tiffany worked alongside FBI analysts, identifying potential victims of Richardson's scheme, while Wilbur's legal team coordinated with federal prosecutors. Evening found them back in the garden, seeking refuge from the chaos inside. The approaching storm painted the sky in dramatic purples and greys, but neither suggested moving inside. I keep thinking about Sandy, Wilbur admitted, breaking their comfortable silence. All those years together, and I never saw her capacity for this level of calculated cruelty. Tiffany touched his shoulder gently. Sometimes we see what we want to see in people we love. Love, he echoed thoughtfully. I'm not sure I ever really knew what that meant until... He trailed off, their eyes meeting with dangerous intensity. Wilbur, she started, her heart racing. We can't... I know, he interrupted softly. You're my doctor. There are ethical considerations, professional boundaries. But Tiffany, what I feel for you isn't just gratitude for my recovery. It's something deeper, something real. Lightning split the sky, followed immediately by thunder. Fat raindrops began to fall, but neither moved. When this is over, he continued, when Richardson and Sandy are brought to justice, when I'm walking independently, will you have dinner with me? Not as doctor and patient, but as two people who found something unexpected in the middle of a storm. Tiffany felt tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. That's a lot of conditions. I'm a businessman, he smiled. I believe in clear terms, and I'm willing to wait until every one of them is met. The rain fell harder, but they remained in their bubble of understanding. Tiffany knew she should maintain professional distance, should focus on the legal battle ahead, should consider her career and reputation. Instead, she found herself saying, yes. When this is over, yes. Their moment was interrupted by urgent footsteps on the garden path. Dr. Chen appeared, somehow maintaining dignity despite the downpour. They're moving on Richardson and Maxwell now. Sandy was tipped off. She's trying to flee the country. Wilbur straightened in his chair. Not this time. Have Marcus activate the contingency plan? Tiffany looked between them. What contingency plan? Let's just say Sandy isn't the only one who knows how to play corporate chess, Wilbur replied grimly. Every private airport, every luxury marina, every possible escape route, they're all being watched. The storm broke in earnest, driving them inside. The hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as federal agents coordinated their operation. Tiffany found herself pulled into urgent consultations about patient records while Wilbur worked his phone, coordinating with his own network of contacts. Hours later, exhausted but victorious, they received the news. Sandy and Maxwell had been arrested trying to board a private jet. Dr. Richardson was in custody. The storm of justice was breaking over all of them. In Wilbur's private room, watching coverage of the arrests on the evening news, Tiffany felt the weight of months of suspicion and fear finally lifting. It's really over, she breathed. This part is, Wilbur agreed. But we're just beginning. He gestured to his legs. I still have a lot of work to do before I earn that dinner date. She laughed despite her exhaustion. Always the overachiever. Only because my doctor inspires excellence, he replied softly. Their eyes met again, full of promise and possibility. Outside, the storm began to clear, stars peeking through breaks in the clouds. Change was coming, justice, healing, and perhaps something even more precious. For now, though, they had work to do. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more physical therapy, federal investigations, media scrutiny. But they would face it together, Doctor and patient, healer and healed, two souls who found each other in the midst of life's darkest storm. The roses in the garden had weathered the tempest, their petals washed clean by the rain. Like them, Wilbur and Tiffany emerged from their storm stronger, more vibrant, ready to bloom in ways neither had imagined possible when their paths first crossed. Agent Matthew's last words before leaving echoed in Tiffany's mind. Sometimes the worst acts of darkness lead us to our brightest light. Looking at Wilbur, seeing the strength and hope in his eyes, she couldn't help but agree. Chapter 10. Passion's Night. Autumn painted Central Park in shades of gold and crimson, visible from the window of Wilbur's private therapy room at St. Mary's. 6 months had passed since the arrests of Sandy, Maxwell, and Dr. Richardson. 6 months of headlines, investigations, and most importantly, continued progress in Wilbur's recovery. Focus on engaging your core, Tiffany instructed, her hands providing gentle support as Wilbur worked with the advanced parallel bars. Your balance is improving, but we need to build more stability. They'd developed a rhythm over these months of therapy, their bodies moving in unconscious synchronization. Tiffany tried to maintain professional distance, but she couldn't help noticing how his muscles had developed, how his confidence grew with each small victory. The prosecutors called again, Wilbur mentioned, concentrating on his steps. They want me to testify at Sandy's trial next month. Tiffany's hands tensed slightly on his waist. How do you feel about facing her? Surprisingly calm. He completed another step, his movements growing more fluid. She doesn't have power over me anymore. You helped me take that back in more ways than one. Their eyes met in the mirror that lined the therapy room wall. The intensity of his gaze made Tiffany's heart race, but she maintained her professional composure. Your recovery is your own achievement. I just provided guidance. You provided more than that, he said softly. You gave me back my faith in human connection, in trust. His hand covered hers where it rested on his waist. In possibilities. The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions. Since that rainy night in the garden, they'd maintained careful boundaries, focusing on his recovery and the legal proceedings. But the attraction between them had only grown stronger, fed by shared victories and quiet moments of understanding. Speaking of possibilities, Tiffany said, gently redirecting them to safer territory, let's try something new today. She moved to retrieve a specially designed walking cane. I think you're ready for supported walking without the parallel bars. Wilbur's eyes lit up with the challenge. They'd been working toward this milestone for weeks, building strength and confidence through increasingly difficult exercises. Lead the way, Doctor. She positioned herself beside him, close enough to provide support, but giving him space to find his balance. Remember your training, engage your core, focus on fluid movement, and most importantly, trust yourself. The first step away from the parallel bars was tentative, his knuckles white on the cane's handle. Tiffany watched every muscle movement, ready to catch him if needed, but letting him experience this moment of independence. One step became 2, then 3. Wilbur's face showed intense concentration, but also growing confidence. They made their way slowly across the therapy room, each step a small victory against the odds that had once seemed insurmountable. Look at you, Tiffany breathed, professional pride mixing with deeper emotions. You're walking. Wilbur's smile was radiant. Race you to the window. She laughed, the sound echoing off the therapy room walls. Always the overachiever. Let's master straight lines before we attempt marathons. They continued their careful progress until they reached the window overlooking Central Park. The late afternoon sun bathed them in golden light as Wilbur leaned against the windowsill, catching his breath. I never thought I'd see this view standing up again, he admitted quietly. When Sandy left, when Richardson said I'd never walk, I lost more than my mobility. I lost hope. Tiffany's heart ached at the memory of his early days in therapy, the bitterness and despair that had clouded his eyes. And now, he turned to face her, still supporting himself but standing tall. Now I have more hope than I've ever had. For my recovery, for justice, for... He paused, his blue eyes intense. For us. The word hung between them, charged with possibility. Tiffany took a small step back, maintaining professional distance even as her pulse quickened. Wilbur, we've talked about this. Until you're fully recovered, until the legal proceedings are complete. I know, he interrupted gently. I respect the boundaries, Tiffany, but that doesn't change how I feel. How we feel. Before she could respond, a knock at the therapy room door announced the arrival of Marcus Chen, Wilbur's CFO and friend. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. He held up his tablet, displaying breaking news headlines. Medical fraud ring exposed. Dr. Richardson pleads guilty, agrees to testify against co-conspirators. Tiffany's breath caught. He's turning on Sandy and Maxwell. The dominoes are falling, Marcus confirmed. The FBI found offshore accounts, falsified medical records going back years, Richardson singing like a bird to save himself. Wilbur absorbed this news, his hand tightening on the cane. Good. Let him talk. The more he reveals, the more patients we can help. The investigation had already identified dozens of victims of Richardson's scheme, patients who, like Wilbur, had been given falsified diagnoses to support insurance fraud and corporate takeovers. Each discovery strengthened the case against Sandy and Maxwell while validating Tiffany's innovative treatment approaches. The hospital board is calling an emergency meeting, Marcus continued. They want both of you there. Apparently, there's talk of establishing a dedicated rehabilitation program based on Dr. Tara's methods. Tiffany felt overwhelmed. After months of skepticism and resistance, her treatments were finally being recognized, but more importantly, justice was coming for all those who had suffered under Richardson's cruel scheme. We should head to the meeting, she said, reaching for Wilbur's wheelchair. They'd made incredible progress, but long distances were still beyond his current capabilities. Actually, he said, adjusting his grip on the cane, I'd like to walk. With your support. The request carried multiple meanings, making her heart flutter. Always. Their progress to the boardroom was slow but steady, drawing amazed looks from hospital staff who had grown used to seeing Wilbur in his wheelchair. By the time they arrived, word of his walking had spread through the hospital grapevine. The board meeting was a blur of congratulations, policy discussions, and planning for the future. Tiffany presented her treatment protocols again, this time to an audience eager to implement them. Wilbur spoke about his recovery journey, his testimony carrying the weight of both personal experience and business acumen. Hours later, exhausted but triumphant, they found themselves back in the hospital garden. The roses had given way to autumn flowers, their colors echoing the sunset painting the sky. Quite a day, Tiffany observed, watching Wilbur navigate the garden path with his cane. His movements were smoother now, confidence building with each step. Quite a 6 months, he corrected. Sometimes I wonder if this is all a dream. Walking again, justice being served, finding... He paused, looking at her with that intensity that made her breath catch. Finding you. Wilbur, she started, but he held up his hand. Let me finish, please. He took a careful step closer to her. You've given me back my life, my hope, my future, but more than that, you've shown me what real love looks like. Not the calculated manipulation Sandy practiced, but genuine care, professional dedication, personal integrity. Tiffany felt tears threatening. I was just doing my job. No, he said softly. You did so much more. You saw me, not as a wealthy CEO, not as a charity case, but as a man worth fighting for. You risked your career to expose the truth. You pushed me when I needed pushing and supported me when I needed support. He took another step, closing the distance between them. The legal battles are almost over. My recovery is progressing beyond anyone's expectations. Soon, I won't be your patient anymore. And then, she whispered, her heart racing, and then I'm going to take you to dinner, really take you, walking into the restaurant on my own 2 feet. We're going to talk about everything except medical conditions and legal proceedings, and I'm going to start showing you exactly how much you mean to me. The autumn breeze carried the scent of late-blooming flowers, nature's backdrop to this moment of transformation. Tiffany looked at the man before her, strong, determined, ethical to his core, and felt her carefully maintained professional walls beginning to crumble. That's quite a treatment plan, Mr. William, she managed, though her voice shook slightly. I learned from the best, Doctor. Tara. His free hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. Some healings take time, patience, and perfect timing. A shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, as if heaven itself was blessing this moment of connection. Soon, the last barriers between them would fall away, leaving only the truth of what they'd become to each other. But for now, they stood together in the garden where their journey had begun, doctor and patient on the verge of becoming something more. The hospital lights cast gentle shadows through the autumn leaves, creating a private world for 2 people who had found each other in the midst of life's harshest storm. Their love story wasn't conventional, born in tragedy, nurtured through healing, strengthened by shared purpose. But perhaps that made it more precious, more real. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more therapy sessions, court preparations, media attention. But tonight, in this garden where miracles had already bloomed, 2 hearts beat in perfect synchronization, ready for whatever the future might hold. As if to seal the moment, Wilbur lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Thank you, he whispered, for believing in possibilities. Tiffany's response was lost in the evening breeze, but her eyes held promises that no words could adequately express. Sometimes, she was learning, the greatest healings happened not in therapy rooms or hospital wards, but in the quiet moments when 2 souls recognized their perfect match. The garden held its secrets as darkness fell, witnessing yet another miracle in a place where science and love had proven equally powerful medicines. Chapter 11. Justice and Joy. The federal courthouse loomed against the winter sky, its granite facade a monument to justice about to be served. Wilbur stood before the entrance, leaning lightly on his cane, his breath visible in the December air. After months of preparation, Sandy and Maxwell's trial was about to begin. Ready for this? Tiffany asked softly, standing close enough to offer support if needed. She wasn't here as his doctor today. His recovery had progressed enough that he'd officially been discharged from her care last week. Today, she was here as something else, something they were both still defining. More than ready, he replied, adjusting his tie. The custom-tailored suit emphasized how far he'd come from the broken man in a hospital bed. Having you here makes it easier. They climbed the courthouse steps together, his movements steady and controlled. Months of therapy had rebuilt not just his physical strength, but his confidence. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. Press crews set up their equipment, eager to cover what promised to be one of the year's biggest corporate fraud trials. Marcus met them outside the courtroom, tablet in hand. Richardson's testimony is scheduled for this morning. His plea deal requires full disclosure of the scheme. He hesitated, glancing at Wilbur. Sandy's here. She asked to speak with you before proceedings begin. Wilbur's hand tightened on his cane, but his voice remained steady. "Number, anything she has to say can be said under oath." They found their seats in the crowded courtroom, Tiffany beside him, Marcus and the legal team arrayed behind them. When Sandy was led in, Wilbur felt Tiffany's hand slip into his, offering silent support. His ex-wife's designer clothes couldn't hide the strain of months in custody. She looked smaller somehow, less polished, though her eyes still carried that calculating gleam he remembered. She glanced their way once, her expression flickering when she saw him standing, supporting himself with just a cane. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecution laid out a devastating timeline of fraud, conspiracy, and manipulation. Sandy's sophisticated scheme had targeted not just Wilbur, but dozens of other victims, all wealthy individuals whose medical conditions were falsified to support insurance fraud and hostile takeovers. Dr. Richardson took the stand first, his previous arrogance replaced by nervous tension. Under questioning, he revealed the full scope of their operation. "Mrs. William, Sandy, approached me about manipulating medical records," he testified. "She said her husband's accident presented a perfect opportunity. The plan was to ensure he remained dependent, unable to challenge her for control of the company." "And the fertility diagnosis?" the prosecutor asked. "Completely fabricated. We administered drugs that would temporarily suppress certain functions, then falsified the test results. The goal was to give her grounds for divorce while maximizing her settlement." Each revelation felt like a physical blow, yet Wilbur remained outwardly calm. Tiffany's presence beside him was an anchor, reminding him that every lie had ultimately led him to a greater truth. During a brief recess, they found a quiet corner away from the media frenzy. "Are you okay?" Tiffany asked, her dark eyes full of concern. "Better than okay," he assured her. "Each testimony proves what you discovered through your dedication to real healing. You're not just helping me get justice, you're helping expose a system that hurt countless others." Their moment was interrupted by Agent Matthews, who approached with purpose. "Mr. William, Dr. Tara, you need to hear this. Maxwell's lawyer just contacted the prosecution. He wants to deal." "Let me guess," Wilbur said grimly. "He's willing to turn on Sandy." "Like rats from a sinking ship," Matthews confirmed. "He's offering evidence of similar schemes dating back years. Sandy wasn't just his accomplice. She was the architect of the entire operation." The afternoon session brought Maxwell's devastating testimony. He detailed how Sandy had approached him even before marrying Wilbur, how they'd identified wealthy targets and manipulated their medical care through Richardson's network. The accident in Italy had simply accelerated their existing plans. Sandy's composed facade cracked as her former partner laid bare their conspiracy. When her own attorney suggested a plea deal, she finally broke, standing up in court to shout accusations and justifications. "You don't understand what it's like," she screamed at Wilbur, "always being seen as nothing but a trophy wife, a pretty face. I built this scheme from nothing. I outsmarted all of you." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder, restoring order. Sandy was led away, her outburst ensuring any chance of leniency was gone. The prosecution rested its case, confident in a conviction. Outside the courthouse, snow began to fall as reporters clamored for statements. Wilbur faced the cameras steadily, Tiffany at his side. "Today isn't about revenge," he declared. "It's about justice. Not just for me, but for every patient whose trust was betrayed by this scheme. My recovery, thanks to the dedication of Dr. Tara and the team at St. Mary's, proves that miracles are possible when medicine is practiced with integrity and compassion." Later that evening, they found themselves in the hospital garden where their journey had begun. Despite the winter chill, the space held a special meaning for them both. Wilbur had insisted on walking the entire way from the courthouse, refusing to use the wheelchair even when Tiffany gently suggested taking a break. I need to do this, he'd said. Need to prove to myself that they didn't win, that their lies didn't define my future. Now, standing among snow-dusted rose bushes, Wilbur turned to face the woman who had helped him reclaim his life. I have something to tell you. Tiffany's heart skipped. That sounds serious. It is. He shifted his weight, demonstrating his improved balance by letting go of the cane. As of this morning, I'm officially cleared by the Medical Review Board. No more doctor-patient relationship, no more ethical constraints. Her breath caught as he took a step closer. Wilbur, I made you a promise, he continued softly. About dinner, about showing you exactly what you mean to me. I've waited, respected boundaries, focused on healing. But Tiffany, his hand cupped her cheek gently, I don't want to wait anymore. The snow fell softly around them, creating a private world of white. Tiffany felt years of professional restraint melting away as she leaned into his touch. We should probably discuss. Probably, he agreed, moving closer still. We should discuss many things, but right now, in this moment, I just want to. His lips found hers with gentle certainty, a kiss that held both passion and promise. Tiffany felt herself responding, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders as the last barriers between them dissolved like snowflakes. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Wilbur rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the first day you crashed into my wheelchair. Tiffany laughed softly, joy bubbling up from some deep place inside her. That would have been highly unprofessional. He agreed, stealing another quick kiss. But worth the wait. A sound from the hospital entrance made them step apart, though their hands remained linked. Dr. Chen stood in the doorway trying to suppress a smile. If you two are finished conducting therapy in the garden, he said dryly, the board would like to discuss establishing a permanent research position for innovative rehabilitation techniques, assuming Dr. Tara is interested in continuing her work here, perhaps with slightly more professional boundaries in future cases. Tiffany blushed but stood her ground. Every case is unique, Dr. Chen. Sometimes healing requires us to challenge conventional boundaries. Clearly, he replied, his eyes twinkling. Though perhaps future breakthroughs could involve less garden rendezvous in snowstorms. After he left, Wilbur pulled Tiffany close again. He's right about one thing. We should get out of the snow. Have dinner with me? I know a perfect little Italian place. Italian? She raised an eyebrow. Feeling nostalgic for the Amalfi Coast? Time to replace bad memories with better ones, he said softly. Starting tonight. As they walked together through the gently falling snow, Tiffany marveled at how life's darkest moments could lead to its brightest lights. A tragic accident, a bitter betrayal, months of dedicated healing, all creating the path that led them here, to this moment of perfect understanding. The courthouse lights glowed in the distance, justice finally served. But here in their garden, surrounded by winter's quiet beauty, Wilbur and Tiffany found a different kind of justice, the kind that comes when truth conquers lies, when healing touches both body and soul, when love proves stronger than betrayal. And as they reached Wilbur's car, he surprised her with one more demonstration of progress. Opening her door first, he moved with fluid grace that showed just how far he'd come. No cane needed, no support required, just a man treating his lady to dinner as if they'd been doing this dance forever. Ready for our next adventure? He asked, his blue eyes sparkling with promise. Tiffany's answer was another kiss, soft and sure, sealing their transition from doctor and patient to something far more precious. The snow continued to fall, blessing their new beginning with winter's quiet magic, while somewhere above, destiny smiled at a plan perfectly executed. The garden would hold their secret a while longer, watching over the place where healing and love had proven to be the same miracle, just wearing different names. And in the morning their story would begin a new chapter, one written not in medical charts or court documents, but in the eternal language of hearts, finding their perfect match. Chapter 12. 3 Little Miracles. The maternity ward at St. Mary's buzzed with anticipation as Dr. Sarah Chen studied the ultrasound screen. "Well," she announced with a smile, "it seems your luck comes in 3s. Congratulations, you're having triplets." Wilbur's grip on Tiffany's hand tightened as they watched 3 distinct heartbeats flutter on the monitor. After everything they'd endured, the betrayals, the legal battles, the long road to recovery, this moment felt like destiny's final blessing. 2 boys and a girl, Dr. Chen confirmed, moving the wand carefully. All perfectly healthy and developing right on schedule. Tears streamed down Tiffany's face as she watched their miracles dance on the screen. The babies they'd been told could never exist were proving every lie wrong, every false diagnosis fraudulent. Wilbur leaned down to kiss her forehead, his own eyes glistening with joy. The delivery room erupted in controlled chaos 3 months later as 3 determined babies decided to make their entrance within minutes of each other. Wilbur stood strong beside Tiffany, supporting her through every contraction, living proof of both their medical and emotional triumph. "Push!" Dr. Chen encouraged as the first baby crowned. Jackson's eager to meet his parents. Their firstborn arrived with a lusty cry, his brother James following close behind. Little Jasmine made them wait a few extra minutes, but when she finally appeared, her cry was the strongest of all. Wilbur cradled his daughter while the nurses cleaned up his sons, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "They're perfect," he whispered, bringing Jasmine to Tiffany's side. "All 3 of them. Absolutely perfect." Each baby showed distinct personalities from the start. Jackson, the eldest by 2 minutes, had his father's intense blue eyes and determination. James sported his mother's dark curls and quiet strength. And little Jasmine, their final miracle, somehow inherited both their healing spirits. "She's got your healing touch," Wilbur observed as Jasmine gripped his finger, "and my business sense. Listen to how she negotiates for attention." Tiffany laughed, exhausted but radiant. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what? For trusting me, for fighting for your recovery, for giving me 3 perfect miracles." "Thank you," he countered softly, "for showing me that the greatest miracles come from believing in possibilities." Outside the hospital window, a brilliant rainbow broke through the clouds, nature's own celebration of love's triumph over adversity. The family of 5 cuddled close, their journey from tragedy to triumph complete. For in the end, their story wasn't just about recovery from injury or justice served. It wasn't even about the miracle of triplets or the power of medical innovation. It was about 2 hearts who found each other in life's darkest moment, who chose to believe in possibilities when everything seemed impossible, who proved that love's greatest miracles often come disguised as life's deepest challenges. And somewhere in heaven, destiny smiled at a plan perfectly executed, while in the garden below, new roses bloomed, promising more miracles for those with hearts open to receive them.